BookTube, it's Sarah and welcome back to my channel, The Book Bag. So I got these like fun little press-on nails from the drugstore because I've never had long nails before and I wanted to try them out. They're kind of giving me like witchy vibes, so I thought it would be the perfect time to film a spooky books kind of video. The leaves are changing outside already. It's September 8th when I'm filming this, so that's a little alarming. But you know what? The internet and I guess also nature is like, spooky season's here, get with it. So this is me getting with it. So I think I'm going to talk about these books in different categories. So I'm going to start with like true crime and then I'm going to go fiction in order of like least scary to most scary. A caveat is that I'm a baby, so my like most scary is probably not actually all that bad. So if you're a scaredy cat, then you too can probably read these books and be mostly okay, because I am just a wimp. But that's okay. It's all in good fun. So let's go. So for my first category, we have true crime books. And I've got two for this one. So the first book I want to talk about is The Stranger Beside Me by Ann Rule. Actually, both of the books in this category are by Ann Rule. I think she used to work for the police, like writing up reports and stuff. So all of her books are like really detailed and like well written. But the first one is The Stranger Beside Me, which is about Ted Bundy, who, like, if you don't know, a quick summary of Ted Bundy is he went around in the, I think, 70s killing young women. He was a guy who would like pretend to have like a hurt arm and have like a sling on his arm and be like, oh, could you help me get this, piece of luggage or whatever into my car? And then of course like the polite young women would be like, yes, of course. They would help him. They'd lean over into the trunk and he'd hit him with a crowbar, stuff him in the trunk, and then drive off and murder them. That was kind of his MO. So that's that guy. That's, he's probably the reason why you're not supposed to talk to strangers anymore, and you don't go get in cars with strange people. Thanks, Ted Bundy. So the really interesting thing about this book is that Ann Rule actually knew Ted Bundy. I think they had worked together briefly for a period of time, and she knew him and she was like, oh, he's like such a charming, like, good-looking young man, so polite. But, turns out he was a mass murderer. Just, you never know people. So basically the book follows the course of Ted Bundy's murders. It's a really interesting story. Obviously upsetting because, he killed people. It's not nice. Don't do that, kids. It was really interesting to see how they had such a hard time catching him. Like, he went to a different state and like they didn't share information across state borders, so that really hindered their investigation. Or like they got him for kidnapping and I think it was aggravated assault or something, and he was in jail and then he wanted to be his own attorney. So they kind of let him have a lot more freedom than most prisoners would who are on trial, and they left him alone in a courtroom and he jumped out of a second-story window and like ran off and survived for almost a week in the wilderness before they caught him again. Like, it's just an absolutely bonkers story, even without the multiple murders. He killed like potentially like 30 people, I think was the number. But it's really interesting to see like this whole story laid out. It's laid out really well, very detailed, because she did work with the police in like writing out various cases and stuff. But then also to have her kind of near the end of the book realize that, oh my god, it's this guy that I kind of know, which was just a very interesting thing to have in a true crime book where like the author actually knew the murderer. She couldn't really wrap her head around it. She was like, oh my god, this is not the kind of person I would think who'd be doing this stuff. Yeah, so that I think is probably like my top true crime book. But like that one, whenever people are like, oh, what's a good like book about serial killers, that's one I always recommend. The next one I want to talk about is Small Sacrifices, also by Ann Rule. So this is about Diane Downs, who shot her 3 children, one of them who ended up dying, and then like lied. Like, she shot them, took them to the hospital, and was like, oh my god, this guy like shot my kids, like he waved us over on the side of the road and I pulled over, and then he like was threatening me and trying to rob me, and then he shot my kids. So like this was also a really interesting one because you're like, obviously something's not clicking in her head. She's not doing great because first of all she shot her kids, but then second of all she like then takes them to a hospital, like I think she must have thought that she was like too smart and was like, what would a mother do if her kids were shot? And then like, concocted this story and like ran up to the ER. But yeah, so that was also another one where you're like, oh my god, what is this person thinking? just true crime books are very interesting. A little terrifying, of course, because you're like, oh my god, anyone could kill me. But very good. And Anne Rule writes really good ones. I do want to read more of her books. So now we're going to go and talk about fiction books. So I'm going to start with the least scary of them, and then we're going to get to the most scary. I have an honorary, like a little bonus category of witchy books. It's just one book. I just really wanted to recommend this book because I love this book. It's called The Once and Future Witches by Alix E. Harrow, and it's about these three sisters in the kind of like suffragette era, and there used to be witches, but there aren't anymore. There are like little bits of magic, like kind of household magic that still exists, but like witches aren't a thing anymore until these three sisters kind of end up accidentally reviving magic. And so there's a lot of really cool themes, like there's like the magic, but then there's also, they talk about like the suffragettes, and there's talk about like race and racism. There's a lot of like different themes through it. So yeah, it's a really interesting book. There's like a lot of really neat kind of social issues discussed within it. The writing's really nice. The cover is gorgeous. I'll have it on the screen here somewhere. But I really love it. So if you're looking for a witchy book without any scary things, this is the one for you. And if you're not looking for that, you should read it anyways, because it's really good. So now we're going to start with our kind of like atmospheric category for the books. Not really that scary, just kind of like dark, gives you like little creepy vibes, but nothing that's going to stop you from sleeping. So the first book I have is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. So this one is not really a horror or anything. It follows our narrator, who does not have a name, who falls in love with this guy, Maxim, marries him, and they like go off to his estate. And it turns out that he had been married before and that his wife had died. And everyone, like, except for him, but everyone else is like still kind of haunted by the idea of his previous wife, Rebecca. And so it's this poor young girl who's just married this older man, trying to become mistress of the household and stuff, while she feels this presence of his wife just kind of like weighing on her shoulders, or his ex-wife, I should say. And it's just really kind of like got a gothic feel to it. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's kind of like dark. And like stuff starts to pop up where she was like, how did Rebecca die? This is kind of like a little suspicious. And it's really good. And it's a classic, but it's one of those like really accessible classics. Like, I don't really enjoy a lot of classics. I find the writing can be like, really hard to get into and stuff. But like the writing was not too old-timey, like it wasn't enough to put you off. And it was a really interesting story. And I think just Daphne du Maurier does a really good job of really infusing the book with that like atmosphere and that kind of like creeping sense of dread that like something's gone wrong, something's not quite right, but you can't really like put a pin in like what it actually is. I do want to read more of her books. Next, I'm going to talk about two books by the same author. Apparently this is a theme. So The Binding by Bridget Collins, which follows a young boy named Emmett, who ends up being an apprentice to the town binder. So this is someone who takes people's like memories and binds them into a book so that they don't have to remember it anymore. And they can like move on past whatever this memory is, usually like a bad memory. And so he ends up apprenticing with this bookbinder, and then he one day comes across a book with his name in it, which means that he had visited before and actually had one of his memories bound. And so this one is also not like horror or anything, but has, just like look at it and it's kind of got like these kind of vibes. It's kind of got these like dark, musty workshop vibes. Just, yeah, like those like, magician apprentice kind of vibes going on. So that one's good, not super spooky. There's also like two different timelines in it, and like the past timeline's a little bit lighter, not as atmospheric. So I feel like this is a good like beginning of spooky season. Like you're transitioning out of summer into Halloween feels. The next book, which I just read actually, is The Betrayals, also by Bridget Collins. So this is a dark academia book. This has 4 different perspectives, and it follows mostly this guy named Leo Martin, who went to this academy, Montvert, where they play something called the grand jeu. So like the grand game, the big game, which is really like hard to pin down. The description of it is very kind of vague and you're like, what is this game? I don't know. But basically the students who go there like study these old colleges and then try to make their own. And so it follows him after he's graduated and he comes back to the school to kind of study the college. And then it also follows, it has like his diary in the past, and there's a couple other characters, like one of the teachers at the school. They have their perspectives in the book as well. So this is really like dark academia vibes. There's like a little bit of a mystery to it where you're like, something is weird and I don't know what it is. There's like something in here that's not quite right. And there's something to be discovered, but you're not sure what it is. And there's also the mystery all along, like, what the heck is this college thing? Like, what are these that they're writing and like making? Which is like sort of resolved at the end, but it's kind of like, it's meant to be vague. So those are both really good books. I would say the Betrayals has a slightly darker vibe than The Binding. There's a bit more of like, you know, shadowy corners and like people like sneaking around at night. There's also The Death of Mrs Westaway by Ruth Ware. I'm going to talk a lot about Ruth Ware's books because she's like the only like mystery, almost horror writer that I can read. That's about as scared I get. But this one, The Death of Mrs Westaway, wasn't really scary. It was a lot more atmospheric. So this follows Hal. She works as a tarot card reader, kind of in like carnival sort of things on a pier. And she gets a letter that is telling her she has like been bequeathed this huge inheritance from this random person that she's like, I have no idea who this is. So she goes to like this mansion and she meets like this family of this person who has died, who has bequeathed her this inheritance. And so everyone's trying to figure like, who the heck is she? Why does she get like the house and all the money and stuff when like we've never seen her before? And so it's kind of this like mystery of like, how is she related to this family, or like how did she end up being the one who is going to get all this money? And then it also starts to like tease out all these like kind of family relations, the different, you know, conflicts within the family. And then there's some like other mysteries that start to appear and unravel the longer that she's in this house. So it has very, yeah, like gothic, spooky vibes. Really like, you're like, oh god, what the heck is going on? Oh my god. I mean, if you look at the cover of it, those are the vibes. So that's going to be that for the atmospheric setting. Okay, so now we're going to go on to the unsettling category. We're going to bump up the scare a little bit. So these are ones that like don't scare you, but like make you a little creeped out. You're a little like, oh, what? So starting at the milder end of things, we're going to go with Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. I love this book. I was uncertain about it at first, but it was so pretty and like had little illustrations in it too, and I was like, maybe I'll give it a shot. I'm really glad that I did. So it's kind of in like two separate timelines. So it starts with the Brookhants School for Girls, and there's this like group of girls who fall in love with this book by Mary MacLane, which is an actual book, which I would love to read, but I haven't gotten around to reading it. And it kind of seems like this book has this kind of unearthly supernatural hold on them. They've formed this little club. The school is like, this book is not appropriate for your children. It's going to give you ideas beyond your place. And it ends up with these girls from their little like book appreciation society who end up dead on school grounds with this book near them. Within, I think it was 5 years of this happening, the school closes for good, and it's been like abandoned ever since. So then the other timeline takes place like over 100 years later, when this like prodigy young girl has written a book about that series of events happening at Brookhants School, and they're making a horror movie out of it. So it follows like the author of the book and the two lead actresses as they go to the school and are like preparing for filming, and then like kind of like supernaturally like creepy things start happening, and they're like, oh my god, what's going on? So this was like really, there's like a lot happening in this book. There's a lot going on, but it was really good. I wasn't so sure about like the movie part of it at first, because I was like, oh, I love boarding school books. There's like queer girls in it, amazing, we love that representation. But I wasn't so sure about the movie adaptation, but that was actually really good. They were both, I feel like both stories were like equally good, and they were both like unsettling and kind of creepy, and there was lots of like mysteries going on all over the place, and it was just really great. I think you should read it. It's like a little bit spooky, but not too bad. I didn't have nightmares from it or anything. It's just kind of got those like, oh god, I'm so worried about these kids vibes. The next one is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. So this is also set at like a girls' boarding school, except that there has been an outbreak of some sort of disease or something that is causing the girls to mutate. So they have been under quarantine, all the teachers have died, and now they're kind of fending for themselves as they get these like gross mutations on them. So this one was like a little scarier. It was definitely more of a kind of body horror feel to it. Like they described all the like different things that were happening to these girls' bodies that were like pretty gross. It was a little like icky sometimes, but it was also interesting. It wasn't quite as good as playing Bad Heroines, I don't think, but it's definitely like if you're looking for something that's a little like icky, this is the book for you. The next one I have is One by One by Ruth Ware. So this one is a mystery. It's a like young startup tech company who goes away to the mountains in France, I think, for like bonding exercises. So they go there and then there's an avalanche, and so they're trapped on this little cabin on the side of the mountain all by themselves, and they're completely cut off from everyone, and then someone dies. So there's this group of, I don't know, under 10 people who are all trapped in this cabin together, and they're trying to figure out like who the murderer is, because it's obviously one of them, because there's no one else who can get to them. And like the main character, like she used to work for the company, but like split with them, and then they like asked her back for this retreat. So this is like a really good kind of like murder mystery up in the mountains all by yourself. Also creepy because you're following this main character. She's trying to like escape from whoever the murderer is, but you don't know who it is. And it's a good kind of like whodunit sort of thing. Next we have I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Iain Reid. So this one I don't want to say too much about, but it's basically like a girl going back to meet her boyfriend's parents, and it's just the story of kind of their trip there, the like meeting the parents, and like that, like just like the trip of like going to meet the parents and how things go. And it's just, yeah, it's one of the ones again where you're like, something's not right, but you don't know what it is. It's just like little, you're like, oh, this is like a normal story of like them going to meet the parents, and then there's like a couple little things that you're like, it's kind of weird. What's going on there? And then it just gets weirder and weirder and weirder. This one did freak me out a little bit. I don't think I had nightmares from it, but it was definitely a one that I did not want to read before bed. Not to be read in the dark. I will say though, for that one, I did have there was a little weird kind of like mental health representation. I don't know, it felt a little bit like a demonization of mental illness, which I didn't feel great about. But if you don't consider that, then it's pretty decent. All right, and now we're at the final category. So this is the scary category. These are books that either gave me nightmares, or like I had to sleep with the light on, or just like, yeah, they just like lived in my mind and I was terrified. Keep in mind, once again, I'm a baby, so like they're probably not actually all that scary, but they got to me. So the first one I have is a short story called The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I read this in high school for an English class, and it freaked me the heck out. Oh my god. So basically, it's a short story based on the author's experience. She had postpartum depression, which obviously they didn't know in that time. That's what it was, because it's set in ye olden days. But she had postpartum depression, and the doctor prescribed her a rest cure, which is basically sit in bed, don't do anything. You can't like sit up, you can't talk to people, you can't walk around, you lie in bed until you feel better. Not a great cure, obviously. If you're depressed, you're gonna do that anyways, so this is not helpful. But the author then took her experiences and turned them into this short story, which follows a woman who is experiencing, like, I think it was hysteria or something. Hysteria, you know, it's not actually a thing. But anyways, who gets prescribed by a doctor this rest cure, and she's stuck in this room, and she slowly starts to kind of lose it. as you would if you are trapped in a bed and you can't do anything and you're basically like a baby again. You can't feed yourself, you can't like clothe yourself. Everyone's doing stuff for you. And the only thing she has to entertain herself is like this patterned yellow wallpaper. So she kind of starts to like see figures in it and starts to just lose it. This was really creepy. It freaked me out when I read it in broad daylight in English class, and it still freaks me out to think about it too much now. Really does a really good job of like that kind of, once again, like the creeping sense of dread, but then also the like really freaky images and the, yeah, just one of the ones where you're kind of like, is there something behind me? Is there something behind me? Oh my god. So yeah, that freaked me out. Next, I think probably last, these are like the scariest books I've read, I think, is The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. This one, there's this girl who becomes a nanny for this rich family, and she goes to this like house. It's kind of isolated, but it's like a super smart house, like that has all like the fun tech and stuff. And she's watching over these children who are kind of, they're not like evil, but they're like problem children. You know, they're like really trouble and they always have to get new nannies. So she's at this house that has like a poison garden in the back and is trying to like figure out the technology, take care of these children. And then at night hears like steps above her room, even though her room is on the top floor of the house. There's like this little door in her room that leads to, I don't know, no one knows where the key is for it, but she can hear like noises behind it. This book, I stayed up too late reading it. I had to sleep with my lights on. I don't think I got to sleep very quickly. I'm pretty sure this is one of the ones where I was holding the book, I didn't want to read anymore because it was already scary, but I was sitting there holding this book because I didn't want to put it down and have something on the other side of it jump at me. It was very scary for me. It was also kind of interesting because there were like the two different sides of like, there's like, you know, is it going to be AI comes to life and like takes over, or is it going to be like ghosts and stuff? Also, it starts out, I should say, it does start out with the nanny in jail because one of the kids dies and they think she did it. So they're like, it's her in jail recounting her experiences, being like, I did not kill this kid. So yeah, I think that is probably the book that has freaked me out the most that I've read. I have very like sense memories of reading this in bed, and I am getting scared right now. So we're not going to talk about it anymore. Those are my spooky book recommendations as we kind of transition into fall and October comes up, because, you know, it's coming. The years start coming and they don't stop coming. But yeah, so if you're a scaredy cat like me, these books might be ones that you could actually read, which is amazing because my mom always tells me I should read Stephen King, and I'm like, Mother, do I look like someone who can handle Stephen King? I read Green Mile, I read Carrie, I read like The Stand and stuff. That's all I need. I am not gonna read the frickin', you know, It. It's not gonna happen. So let me know if you have any other recommendations of books that are like a little creepy, but that aren't going to keep me awake too long at night, because I can't do it, guys. I can't, it's too stressful. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Do you want to say I have newfound appreciation for people who wear these all the time, because like I can't do anything. And like when I type on my phone, it makes the fun little like clicky noises. And I do feel very like #girlboss, but like that is not great, you know? It's really hard to do anything. Every time that like the end of this nail touches things, it makes me want to cringe a little. So maybe the real horror story is fake nails. What is time? It is an older one because it came out in the like 80s or 90s. I don't know.